I'm just going to ask you some questions about the delegates meeting next year. It's the 100th anniversary of the lockdown in the trade unions, and I'm just wondering what kind of themes you're going to think will be coming up in Dublin next year.
Well, first of all, we are all very excited to be going to Dublin. The NUJ, which is a founding member of the International Federation of Journalists, had in the past congresses, either in England or in Scotland, but it's the first time we are going to Ireland. It was a very closely fought bid, but at the end of the day, there is a lot of enthusiasm that we're going to be in Ireland, because there is this convergence of all this, different dates. There's the 100th anniversary of the strike. There is also the year where Ireland's going to be at the presidency of the European Union. So we think that not only kind of the National Union of Journalists in Ireland, but also the labour movement and the citizens of Ireland have got a lot to offer for us. It's also, you talked about themes happening at a time when there is a crisis of journalism almost everywhere in the world. And there is, kind of a parallel theme with the situation today in Ireland with the state of journalism and also, the kind of the wider financial crisis. The theme of it is going to be the fight back. It might be a bit ambitious, but we are trying to move away from several years where journalists all over the world try to digest and understand what's going on, which is just, what is going to be the future of journalism, into, trying to set out, specific kind of ways of how they want to go forward. And I think it's going to be, if it is going to be the springboard for a fight back, Dublin is really kind of maybe the most kind of important city for that discussion to take place.
Do you think that students within the industry can get involved in that kind of thing next year to help with the themes that you've just discussed about?
Well, we very much hope so. We are at the moment trying to sort out the logistics. In fact, one of the most important arrangements is to hold the conference and the arrangement for the conference in union organised establishment, and that has never been done in the IFJ before. Of course, it does restrict the choice for accommodation, for places where different events could take place, but nevertheless, it's it's important that it's happening in Dublin, and it's giving kind of maybe giving us a model of what to do in the future. We're also taking steps to ensure that students play part in it, and we hope that when we start making those arrangements, the reporting part of it, at least kind of the internal one, that's under our control, we will use students. We'll try to bring them together, and that is again something that the NUJ has done very successfully in the last few conferences, and is still doing it now, but the IFJ has never done. All the reporting, even with social media and new ways of doing it, is always in the hands of professionals. They've got the press corps, who comes and get, registered and go and do the business. But we think that journalists could put completely different flavour. I wouldn't say, innocent or neutral, but coming from the journalists, and many of them, are potential kind of, the journalists of the future. We really kind of think about that very seriously and want them to give them all the support that they need to do it.
Okay, just moving on to the UN agreement that was being set out last month to do with the threat towards journalists. The UN agreement motion was set to help protect journalists within the EU. I'm just wondering how you think it's going to progress over the next 10 years with this movement.
Well, first of all, there is one of the biggest part of the crisis of journalism is safety of journalism, safety and protection of journalists. And the IFJ had for about 15 years doing very rigorous monitoring every year of the number of journalists that are killed, the kind of attacks and the circumstances. And that is very much like, an effort to try to raise awareness and make the whole world know that journalists die when doing their jobs. And our research showed that not all journalists die in a zone of conflict. They don't die in wars, or they're not all kind of very famous journalists. The vast majority of journalists are beat journalists. They die in their own patch. And in some countries, when there are today, a very high number of journalists that die for all kinds of reasons. In Mexico, when they kill a lot of journalists, it's because of the way that they report on is a narco war, is that those type of if events take place, within the Mexican society that the journalists are involved in, that may groups of people wants to kill them. We have recorded over 300 journalists dying in Russia. And in Russia, there is a bit of a conflict in Chechnya, but that is not where most of them die. Most of them die at the hand of the targeted killings and at the hand of gangsters. Some of them are political killing. So it has become a very major issue. And when doing the monitoring for the last 15 years, we thought when there was some peaks that it was because of the war in Iraq or something else. But then there is now like a steady drip. There is on average about 2 journalists die every week. So the big issue is how to stop that. How to stop that. And we believe that in many places there are enough kind of international instruments to protect journalists, but that many of the governments are not they haven't got the will to implement them, because part also kind of the issue of the killing of journalists is that in most cases there is total impunity. It's very cheap, to shut up a journalist by killing them. You just hire a killer, and they're out of the way. So impunity is also kind of a huge issue, and the international instruments are precisely tools, try to move on the question of impunity. What we did at the United Nations, and we do that also at the other agencies of the United Nations, like UNESCO. UNESCO have got a brief on the protection of journalists. The Human Rights Council in Geneva have also got a brief in terms of, putting together new mechanisms and new legislations, and you can take cases there, to try to force government to do something about them. But there's still the question of there are enough instruments, but they are not implemented properly. So that events at the UN is to put even more pressure on them to do it. And every now and again, we push them to enact new instrument that in most cases we're trying to make them binding, because there are so many levels within kind of the international institution when there are a lot of resolution and covenant and declaration. Most of them are not binding, even when governments sign them. But there are certain type of legislation that are binding, which means that you can take governments to international courts if they don't implement them. And we're preparing for the next session of the Security Council for another campaign to try to reignite everything that we have been doing on that issue.